Good evening. I'm Heidi Shoup, President of the World Affairs Council in Washington, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here to the World Affairs Council's filming of World Affairs Today. Thank you for joining us this evening for a discussion with Ian Morris, author of The Measure of Civilization: How Social Development Decides the Fate of Nations. Ian Morris is the Jean and Rebecca Willard Professor of Classics and Professor of History at Stanford University. A British-born archaeologist, classicist, and historian, he looks for broad patterns and overall shapes of history, looking at millennia, not election cycles, which is more common time frame in this town. Winston Churchill was reported to have said, "The farther backward you can look, the farther forward you are likely to see." In this case, Dr. Morris is going to help us look far into the future because he begins with the last ice age and compares societies east and west. This volume follows on his 2010 award-winning book, Why the West Rules for Now: The Patterns of History and What They Reveal About the Future. In that volume, he examined the intersection of technology and geography and a number of Western entrepreneurs in the 18th century that propelled the West's rise to power in the 19th century and the development of nuclear weapons and the computer in the 20th century that kept it there. In the 21st century, that earlier book argued economic changes will call into question whether the U.S. in particular will remain so. In this second volume, the subject of this evening's discussion, Dr. Morris presents a groundbreaking numerical index of social development, comparing societies in different times and places, adapting the United Nations approach for measuring development based on 4 principal traits: energy capture per capita, organization, information technology, and war-making capacity. We look forward to a fascinating discussion. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ian Morris.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that very kind introduction, and thank you to everybody here for coming along on such a beautiful evening when I'm sure there's a lot of other things you could be doing rather than sitting in a windowless room listening to me. I'm very happy to be here, happy that it's such a beautiful day today. It was not such a beautiful day yesterday, as you probably noticed, and I managed to pick up a rather nasty cold. So, can you all hear me okay? So I'm a bit croaky tonight, so if I give out completely, that's why. It's not just out of boredom with the whole thing. I picked up a bit of a cold yesterday. So, okay, I'm here this evening to talk about the new book that was just mentioned, The Measure of Civilization, published by Princeton University Press a few weeks ago. And this book, it's based on the idea that the past is not a very good guide to predicting the future, but it's the best guide we've got. So what I try to do in this book is look at how we might be able to identify broad patterns in human history and then use them to get some kind of sense of what might come across the next 100 years or so. And the basic claim I try to make in the book is that there are these really big patterns unfolding across millennia at a global scale that do tell us something about the direction human history is going to be taking. Now, this book, it grew out of sort of 5 or 6 years of work that I'd been doing trying to answer what I think has become like the biggest question that world historians have been asking in the last 30 years. People are trying to explain planetary-wide processes. And the question they've been addressing is one that's been knocking around now for about 200 or 300 years. Because back in the 1700s, Europeans discovered that they had a problem. The problem, as problems went, it was a pretty good one. They were taking over the world, but they didn't know why. Nobody quite understood why this was happening when up till very recently it had seemed like Europeans could expect to be conquered by the Turkish Empire at any moment. So lots of European intellectuals started scratching their heads saying, well, why is this happening? And all kinds of new ideas bounced around. And the Europeans, not surprisingly, eventually came to the conclusion, I know why we're taking over the world. It's because we're better than everybody else. That is the obvious explanation. And the theory that sort of won out in the competition of ideas was that they said if you look back into Europe's distant past, you look back 2,500 years to the age of the ancient Greeks. They said the ancient Greeks create this unique civilization that is different from and better than any other civilization in the ancient world. And it's more inventive and more scientific, and it's about democracy and freedom and all kinds of other great things. It gets picked up by the Roman Empire, which conquers Europe and spreads this idea all around Europe. And then the idea gets passed down through the ages until we come to the pinnacle of Western civilization, which I'm sure you will recognize. So this theory, very satisfactory theory for Europeans, it had a very long, successful lifespan. But of course, in the 20th century, it gets increasingly challenged. And people start to point out all these things it doesn't explain very well, and particularly in the last 30 or 40 years of the 20th century, as East Asian economies really begin to take off and boom, lots of people start saying, quite sensibly, this theory that European dominance of the globe comes from the ancient Greeks and is basically locked in permanently by the excellence of ancient Greece. Well, this theory just doesn't seem to make any sense of the world that we're actually living in. This theory can't possibly be right. Well, result of that, you get these intense debates among historians, which sometimes get quite nasty and personal. Historians, some of you may be historians or know historians. Historians, delightful people. I'm one myself, delightful people. But they can get a little nasty over these arguments. And this one, I think, has gotten particularly nasty because a lot of the time the argument's a bit confused. And what I mean by that is there's confusion among the specialists over what exactly it is that we are trying to explain, what we mean by the key terms that we use, what counts as an explanatory variable, how you would know whether you were right or wrong. All of these things are kind of up in the air and messy. So when I started getting interested in this question, it seemed to me that the best starting point would be some way to clear through a little bit of this thicket of confusion that we'd built up. And because I'm the kind of person that I am, it seemed to me that the best way to clear through this thicket was with some sort of numerical tool where we could express quantitatively what it is we're talking about, and then we can compare these things more directly, and everybody is forced to be on the same page. And by trying to reduce the whole thing to numbers, not suggesting that putting numbers on things automatically makes you more objective than somebody who's looking at them qualitatively. It clearly doesn't. And in constructing this index I'm going to talk about, there's so many steps involved. This is as subjective as any other way of approaching history. But I think the advantage of it is it forces you to be explicit. So that if I say the score for this part of the world is 42.8, whatever that means, I have to then be able to explain why I think it's 42.8, not 42.9 or 42.7, and why it changes to 43.1 a few years later or whatever. I have to have reasons. I have to be able to be explicit. It allows other people to engage with what I'm saying. And if I've got it wrong, it makes it a lot easier to show that I've got it wrong. So I think there are some advantages, particularly in an argument like this one, where the whole thing has gotten so sort of messy and slippery. So, okay, I decided what we need is some kind of numerical index that will allow us to measure the development of societies in different parts of the world, compare their development over time, and see what sort of theory best explains the results that we get. The argument, as I saw it, the argument all came down to what I gradually started to call social development. And what I meant by social development, now I should say one of my pet hatreds in the world is people who read out PowerPoint slides to me, like I can't read myself. But I'm now about to do this to you, basically because I can. I've got it written down here what it says. But this is just to unpack this idea of social development a little bit, so you know what it is I think I'm talking about. And really, social development, the way I'm thinking of it, really comes down to society's abilities to get things done in the world. But putting it a little bit more formally, a little bit more fully, I'd say it's the bundle of technological, subsistence, organizational and cultural accomplishments through which people feed, clothe, house and reproduce themselves, explain the world around them, resolve disputes within their communities, extend their power at the expense of other communities, and defend themselves against others' attempts to extend their power. So it's a fairly broad concept. Basically, a group's ability to master its physical and intellectual environment And in principle, at least, this is something that we ought to be able to measure and compare across space and time and look at how much social development different societies have got. Now, the reason I thought this would be a useful thing to do is that the older theories, these sort of the Plato to NATO theories, saying the ancient Greeks created this wonderful civilization that the modern West has inherited, and that explains the distribution of wealth and power in the world. These Plato to NATO theories